All right, so the Titanic, a Yiddisher cook. So first of all, we have sponsors for the shir. Was sponsored in honor of the Rebbe by dear Tom Menachem Feinstein, and also sponsored in honor of a dear friend of mine, Yosef Yitzchak Alevi ben Basio, Yishrav Atzlocha Rabba Bakel Mikol Koil, and it's also sponsored in honor of Adam and Moshe Shlita through the Bachar Atomim Shalom Moshe Shecharaino. Any future sponsorships for other shiurim are available. Mr. Hashem working on more shiurim, let me know. All right, so the Titanic, Yiddisher cook. Many of you heard about the Titanic, and there's a lot. There's many books about it, many videos made about it. So we're going to be talking first. We're going to give a general overview of the story for those that don't know the story at all, for those that do know just details, and then we'll get into the Yiddisher cook aspect. So, the Titanic was a luxurious British passenger liner that was said to be unsinkable, meaning it was the newest ship of its day. It had things that did not exist in other ships at the time. It had a brand new. It had a swimming pool on board. It had a gym on board. It had a Turkish bath on board. Very, very unique things with kitchens and the dining rooms and things that did not exist in other ships at the time. And this that it was unsinkable, that sentence, that's actually up for debate who actually said that, meaning the builders of the ship and the owners of the ship didn't necessarily say so, but for sure the media and the opinion of people were that the ship was so built, it was definitely built in a very powerful way, and they built it with a lot of safety features in order for it to not to be able to be sunk. But it's not the pshat that they said so. But that was the word that people used to say, and many of the passengers felt that way as well, even though some passengers had this feeling the whole time that something bad is going to happen. Are these real pictures? No, this happened as we see in Tov Reish Ayin Beis or Tov Ayin Reish Beis, and there are many pictures that are real, but a lot of these GIFs and pictures are taken from the videos that people made today. So it set out on its maiden voyage, meaning it's the first time it ever actually went as the sail was from England to New York City. It was on Chav Gimel Nissen, Tov Ayin Reish Beis. And now we like to say Tov Ayin Reish Beis because the way it's spelled, Tov Reish Ayin Beis is Tir Av, means to be hungry, and a lot of times it should be a hunger. So a lot of the years that end up being, if you spell them out, they be like a word that something means negative. We try to spell it differently, but this time I felt to leave it with this not nice spelling because that ended up happening something bad. Akapanim was Isur Chag Pesach, the day after Pesach. That's when it said sail, and was its first time. It was built. It started the preparations. It spent months building it, but like a week or two beforehand, it was finally ready to set sail. And it came at a few places where it left, at 3 major stops in England and in France, and then it started sailing. On the night of Chav Zayin Nissen, meaning Earluch of Ches Nissen, the Titanic struck an iceberg and began to sink. An iceberg is when pieces of ice fall away from different places, and when it's not the captain is not expected to see them. It was a calm night; he couldn't see it, and basically it hit. There's a whole lot of discussions of what happened and how it happened. The pile, it started to sink. There were lifeboats on the Titanic, but there were not enough for all the passengers and the crew. And B'meila, it was understood that many of the people are not going to be able to survive. Why weren't there enough? Because this is one of the people in charge. Hitaka said instead of putting 48 lifeboats, he said 16 will be enough, and they're also not going to be necessary. But the peril, when it started sinking, they realized there won't be enough. And then Captain Smith, that was the captain, he gave the order to start lighting the lifeboats on the Titanic, and his opinion was women and children first, which we'll discuss later, if al pi halacha that's correct or not. And there were 2 different sailors or officers who were responsible to fulfill his command. Some of them said women and children. One of them said women and children only. And therefore, even though there might have been some empty seats, then just leave it. It'll fall again. Just leave it. Even though there might be some empty seats, he didn't let men go in, and the other officer on the other side said, if people will say, if there's empty spots, then why not let men go in? All in all, there was a loss of over 1,500 people out of the approximately 2,200 people that were on board. So that's, in short, very, very short, a number of the kudus of the story of the Titanic. And we want to talk about the Yiddisher cook. The Yiddisher cook, so this actually happens to be the Jewish cook, as in the C-O-O-K, the chef. Now, really, this picture is not from the Titanic. This picture is from a ship that they had, the same company. And on the other company, there was definitely a kosher kitchen. And you have to realize that this year, Tov Reish Ayin Beis, was part of what's called the Great Immigration. The Great Immigration was an era of about 30, 40 years that millions and millions of people came to America, and from those millions, there was over close to, say, 2.5 to 3 million Yidden that came as well. And when the Yidden came on the ships, so many Yidden were religious, kept kosher, and therefore there was a need. So many of the Yidden were religious, and they wanted to keep kosher, and therefore the assumption is that there was a kosher kitchen on the Titanic for the Yidden, because as we'll see, there were a number of Yidden that were religious at the time also that were on the boat. Some were saved, some were not saved. So by pastures, it was a kosher kitchen. This guy on the left without the beard, he's officially the rabbi, and those times it was common in these countries for rabbis not to have beards. And the l'chayra, we don't know of any rabbi that was on board as the supervisor. There is a person that they assume he was the kosher cook, so l'chayra he had to be religious, because when it comes to cooking, there has to be bishul Yisrael, and there has to be basar shenis alamai, many halachas that a kosher cook has to have. It's not so clear what standard of kashrus there was there, but l'chayra there was a kosher cook. There were definitely many Yidden over there. So on this topic, there's two svardim or books that I have. One book is called Konditon. The second book is called The Jews of the Titanic. If anybody wants to buy those books, I strongly suggest to do so. It's interesting. If you want to borrow them to read them, I can let you read them as well. The one on the right, Konditon, is written by a Choker in Eretz Yisrael. His name is Rabbi Yechiel Goldhaber, and he did a tremendous amount of research, and he came up with stories that I'm going to soon share, that he's the one that found all these stories. And his approach in his book, he really has two separate sections. One section is on a different topic, but in the section on the Titanic, he did mainly a Torah perspective, very little other details besides the Torah and Jewish perspective. The book on the left by a guy named Eli Moskowitz came out a few years after the first one, and he's more giving you the stories. So, for example, in his book, every person, besides telling you whatever he knows, he also tells you how much money did he pay for his ticket. Like, it seems like what my reading is that the guy on the left, the book on the left, is less chidushim. It's more malakit. He's just gathering from all the websites and all the other books that are out there. Now, the guy on the right actually did, in a sense, more research. He found old newspapers and stories, and he interviewed people, and he found out a lot more stuff than the guy to us. But B'cholifin, both of them have a lot of interesting things about the story of the Titanic and of the Jewish perspective. And in this what we're going to do now, we're going to cover 4 general topics, which is really, there's a number of other topics. The topics we're going to talk about are stories of survivors, stories of people that did not survive, the shaila of agunos, of people that died and there was no edim, were their wives able to remarry, and the question that we mentioned before about the order of evacuation, who goes first according to halacha, how does that work? Like I said, there's other subjects as well to talk about. Some people talk about the tefillis. A lot of tefillis were neschaber, tefillis to Hashem after the Titanic. A lot of drushes were said about it, bringing out that the whole purpose of the Titanic was to try to show how technology is so strong and powerful, and kivyachol we don't need Hashem, which some people say that it was actually said that either the builders or the owners or the passengers of the Titanic were saying that, and therefore a lot of drushes were showing that you see that you thought you're smarter than the Eibishter, so he showed you who's boss. And throughout the years, there's been many references to the Titanic in this regards, and it was a very unique kind of story in such a case that such the most powerful ship on its first voyage, so many people died. And there are so many things that could have happened that could have saved it, and it is like I said, there's really a lot more to talk about. Sai mitzad Ruchni, Sai mitzad Yiddishkeit, and Sai mitzad the Gashmis. Just to realize, we said there was 2,200 people there, so that means that there were 2,200 stories. Every person has his own story, where he came from, where he was going, his relatives, and what happened to him, and so on. And there are many people that were meant to be there and were planned on being there. They were not there at the end, but it's really ein ladavar safe. There's so much information about it, so we're going to limit ourselves to these 4 subjects. But within the 4 subjects as well, we're also not going to be completely comprehensive. We'll do whatever's in the shir. And if people want, like I said, I can share the book afterwards. So we're going to start off with Sipurei Tviyah, so people that died. Like we said, there were 1,500 people that died. It's a very a number. And from these people, there isn't anywhere a clear list exactly how many Yidden there were. The numbers vary between 40 Yidden to 300 Yidden. Amongst those Yidden, Some of them were religious, some were not religious. There were also people that were Jews that were traveling under the names of Goyim. As we know, many people came to America or to a civilization, so to speak. They tried adopting this, assimilating, so they changed their names. There was actually some people that were non-Jews that traveled under Jewish names. There was one person that he ran away from his wife. He kidnapped his children and ran away from his wife, and he gave himself a Jewish name when he signed up on the boat. So it's from the names it's hard to know. Not everybody said if they're Jewish or not. And so there are people that are officially, like the family says, they were on the boat, but in all the records it doesn't say that they were on the boat, so they must have had different names. So we're going to talk about three specific famous people that died. The first person, his name was Binyamin Guggenheim. Binyamin Guggenheim was the second to the most wealthy person on the boat. In today's numbers, he was a billionaire. And he was on the boat, and his wife and children lived in New York. He was living in France at the time. He kept going back and forth for business. And his family was also, not just himself, they were all millionaires. And when the boat started sinking, so the story goes that he started helping the women and children get into the boats, but he himself didn't want to go into the boat. It's unclear if he had permission to do so or not. But L'Payel, he said, the way the story goes is he said, I'm going to die like a gentleman. Now there's many nuschois, and also in the videos they exaggerate. Some say he took off his life vest, some say he asked for a cigar, he asked for a drink, and I'm going to die like a man, I'm not a coward. And he sent a message with his mashardis that he had to tell my wife, I was thinking about you in the last minutes before I died. It's unclear exactly how accurate all these details are, because there's only one aide that says all of this, and this aide was a friend of his. So it's a bit unclear exactly what the details, but it's understood that he did try helping, and he seemingly could have, but he went, so to speak, bravely to his death. Again, halachically, if that's okay, if he had permission to leave or not, we'll discuss soon. He was a first-class passenger, which another big sugya they talk about a lot is about the first-class passengers and the second-class passengers and the third-class passengers. That the third class paid a lot, they used to pay a lot less money, but they had less accommodation. So the Titanic was also unique, that the third class of the Titanic was equal, or if not better, than second class in other ships. They had their rooms and their dining room and so on. But because of where they were located in the ship, they had a harder time getting to the deck to get to the lifeboats. And there was actually something that there were gates. It's all big machlekes where their gates were able to go out, or they were locked and they couldn't leave. When he was a first class passenger, so he for sure was on the deck helping out. And this is just another diagram of how it was, where the steps were. And these are things that till today people are asking shilas and being choker v'doirish exactly where each in the person of whatever we know where they were. So that was the first. He was the second to the most wealthy person, and the richest Jew for sure. The second famous family that we'll talk about is Isidor, Yitzchak, and Ida Strauss. So the Yitzchak and Ida Strauss, they were actually the co-owners of Macy's department store, the famous Macy's store in New York, or in other states also. So they were also not religious. They were traveling together. They were already older. They were in their 60s, and the Ida Strauss. So since she's a woman, so she had permission to go onto the lifeboat. Again, there's different stories exactly what happened, but definitely she had permission. Either she was on the lifeboat already, and then she went back onto the ship, or she didn't go onto the ship in the first place, but she was telling her husband, and everyone quotes the psukim that Naomi told Ruth, when Ruth told her, go back home to Moav, don't come with me, and she said, no, I'm going with you, wherever you're going to die, I'm going to die as well. So she told her husband, I'm staying with you, I'm not going. Regarding Isidor, if he had permission to go on the boat, it's also unclear. The Chayru, he had permission even though he was a man, but since he was in first class, and he was a chashuv person, and he was wealthy, and he was a very fine person, so the Chayru, he might have had permission, but he didn't want to go there, and the women and children didn't go. I'm going to take their spot. L'Payel, she went, and she stayed on the boat together with him, and they ended up sinking together. Their children were not on the boat, they had a big family. Their children, they were not religious, and some of their descendants today are not Jewish, unfortunately, but Al Kapanim, that's the story. Now here also the Shiloh was it the right thing or the wrong thing? In the Welt after this, though, all the articles spoke about the Kiddush Hashem and the bravery, the courage of the Jews, they're not afraid to die, for good moral ethics and so on. But again, the Shiloh is according to Allah, if that's not okay. But this was one of the most famous stories. This Isidor Strauss, he had a brother, his name was Nosson Strauss, He was also a very big vir, maybe bigger than Isidore. He was actually was in Eretz Yisrael at the time. He was busy going around donating money to the Yishuv in Eretz Yisrael. And when the news came that Strauss died, for most people thought it was Nosson, and they got very scared because, like, in a way, he was more important to them. And when they found that Isidore died, they said it's obviously a tragedy, but for us, it's not such a tragedy. Al Kolponim not because he had no cash with him. He was also a big Baltzdotter. But Isidore was more focused on American Jewry versus Nosson going around to world Jewry, especially Eretz Yisrael. Another interesting story is a guy by the name of Yaakov Birnbaum. Yaakov Birnbaum was actually a Frumiyid, even though his picture doesn't have a beard, but he was a Frumiyid. He was so Isidore Strauss, I forgot to mention, was probably, they lived in New York and they were on a vacation, they were going back. Yaakov Birnbaum, his family lived in Belgium, and he had a company, they were in diamonds, and he lived in California. And he came back to home and he wanted for I guess to meet with his family, for business, whatever it was, and he was planning on leaving before Pesach on a different ship. But his family told him, please stay with us for Pesach, don't go back. So he stayed for Pesach, and he sailed the day after Pesach, and unfortunately he was there. He's the only one when he died, they found his body a few days later, and he's the only one that his matzeva is only Lashon Kodesh. If you see on top of the matzeva, it's meant to be like a shape of a ship, and then those times it was normal that, even today we have that, and some matzevas, they take the person's name Yaakov and they make psukim out of it. So Yud stands for Hashem Mishpatecha Tahim Rabbah. Hashem means judgment in the depths of the ocean, which happened to him. Kolpanim, so he was from a Yid, a family of diamond merchants. And there's actually a fascinating story that happened last year. That there were some Yidden that were in the Netherlands, and they were just walking around, and they happened to be on Chav Ches Nissen, and then they ended up seeing this matzeva with this boat, and they looked at it. Oh my gosh, this person died. It was exactly 110 years. This year is 111 years. That was the story happened in Tafresh Ayin Beis. Now we're Tafshin Pei Gimel, so it's 100. But last year they were on this day. They actually saw they were there. Yidden just said Kaddish, they said Tilm over there for this Jew. So those are some stories. These of these three people. So Isidore Strauss and Yaakov Birnbaum, their bodies were found afterwards. Either Strauss and Guggenheim, their bodies were not found. Meaning, nobody knows, because when they went to search for the bodies, so they found some bodies, but some bodies were so disfigured, they just buried them at sea, which means that they just tossed them back into the ocean. The bodies that were recognizable and they were able to know who it was, or they thought they could figure out, those bodies were brought back. So Strauss was born in one place, later they moved his body somewhere else, whatever his remains. So, next discussion, we'll talk about the Shaila of Agunis. If someone was on the Titanic and afterwards there was no mention of him afterwards, no one knew where he was his wife able to remarry? So this discussion comes to the Gemara in Yevamis. The Gemara is a Mishnah which says that if somebody falls into mayim, into water, bein sheyesh lahem soif, bein she'ein lahem soif. We'll soon see what that means exactly. If the water has an end or doesn't have an end, ishta yasura. His wife is forbidden to remarry because maybe he's still alive somewhere. Amar Rab Meir, Maise be'echad shenafal le'boira godel. He fell into a big pit of water. Va'ala la'achar shloisha yamim. This is obviously not something we can understand in today's science and today's medical age, but this is what Rab Meir testified, that such a person survived seemingly for 3 days underwater, or a kolpanim, as far as they saw, he was underwater, and yet he survived. So therefore, just because you see that it seems like he drowned, you cannot say that he's dead, to allow his wife to remarry. The Gemara then brings a brayse which Tanu Rabbanon, so Rabbi Meir is the Tanakama. Then Chachamim Oimrim, Mayim sheyesh lehem soif ishta muteres, v'she'ein lehem soif ishta yasur. The Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Meir. Chachamim say maybe that story happened, that must have been a miracle. We're not chayshish to that. The Chachamim say if the water has a soif, then his wife can remarry because we know that he died. If the water has no soif, it's open water, then we agree with you that maybe somehow he survived somewhere which we did not see. So what does it mean? Maim sheyesh lehem soif. Amar Abaye kol she'omed v'royim mi'arba ruchaysav. If you can stand and see all sides of the water, and you see that he did not come up from the water anywhere, then you're there for a reasonable time, that a person cannot survive underwater, then you can testify that he died, even though you don't find his body afterwards, and his wife can remarry. However, if if it's Maim Sheyesh Lehem She'ein Lehem Soif, there's no end, then according to the Pshat and the Mishnah and the Gemara, Nebuch, such a woman that her husband was at sea and he's drowned in the ocean, she cannot remarry. She cannot remarry, and she's going to be stuck, as the word Aguna. The word Aguna means anchor. She's anchored down to this marriage, and Nebuch, for the rest of her life, she has to remain single, and she can never remarry. There's a tshuva from the Marami Rothenburg that he writes about the person asking a shaila about her husband died, and he says, "Manas, what can we do? Ein lanu ela divrei Rabbeinu." All we can do, we can turn to, is what Chazal tell us, "Amru nafal b'mayim she'elam l'seif asura," and therefore he concludes, "Ukvar torchu kamoi," already before his times, earlier Rishonim, we're looking limtzoi tzad heter, to try to find a heter, to try to save this aguna, to let her remarry. However, they're not able to, and we're sorry, this is what Eibusha wants of you, to Nebuch remain single your whole life, which is a big tragedy. This is the basic background. However, over the years, there were Rabbanim that did end up coming up with different heterim, and there's actually one of the Achreinim came up with a line that says, whoever saves an aguna is like building up Yerushalayim, up Holoshin, like it's a mitzvah on the Rabbanim to do whatever they can to try to find the heter. So when the Titanic, when it sank, so like I mentioned, the konditon Rabbi Yechiel Goldaver, so he actually did a tremendous amount of research, and he found a whole bunch of kovtzim. They used to have like kovitz artists, but on a lot more sophisticated levels, or Rabbanim, and a whole bunch of kovtzim where rabbis were writing about the Titanic and svaris why the wives should be allowed to marry. Meaning, as far as they know, he was on the ship and it sank, but there are no Aiden that actually saw him specifically sinking. Maybe he survived, maybe he didn't go on the boat in the first place, maybe he ended up being on one of the lifeboats, or maybe he came up somewhere else. There's so many svaris that you can say, so maybe this woman cannot remarry because maybe their husband is still alive somewhere and they're Eishes Ish. But in all the kovtzim that he brings are all seemingly all theoretical, meaning they're not like practical that a Rav is actually paskening. So therefore, when the Rabbanim speak in Lamdis, in Limudim, as interesting as it is, if it's not halacha lemaisa, they don't have the siyata d'shemaya necessarily to pass on halacha lemaisa. So it could be that they were, but they don't mention any names. But there's one shuvah from one Rav that a woman that her husband was on the Titanic, she came to him with an asking him, "Can I remarry?" She came to a Rav, his name was Rabbi Yaakov Meskin. Rabbi Yaakov Meskin, he was a Rav in Nova Praga, and also in Panovich, and later he came to America, and he was a Rav in Burlington in Vermont, and in the last 25 years of his life, he was a Rav in the Bronx in New York, and there's actually letters of the Rebbe back and forth to him. We had different inyanim, so also Chassidus, not connected to the Titanic at all, but still different inyanim in Limud. So he was asked the Shayla of a Peil Mamish. He was asked the actual Shaila, and he wrote a whole long tshuva, and to his Rav, and his Rav wrote back to him, and it seems like the maskana was that she ended up remarrying, that she got a heter to remarry. So the person's name was Shimon Meisner. He was from Russia, and he was, if I'm not mistaken, a tailor, and he had been traveling to New York. His goal was to try to open up shop over there and be successful and send for his wife and children. Like I said, that was the immigration period. Everyone was immigrating to America, and he was hoping to bring them with him. So, but Lapoil, as far as she knows, he was on the ship, and she didn't get any report that he survived. So she came to the Rav, to Rabbi Meskin, and she asked him, "Can I remarry?" So besides the Lechatchila, Rabbi Meskin told her that your children cannot say Kaddish because maybe your father's still alive. So she came to him again. "You don't let my kids say Kaddish. You let me. What's going on over here?" So he wrote the letter, and he had 4 reasons to be mekel. First reason is based on the famous tshuva of the Mabit. The Mabit writes that the Mishnah is talking about a case that the person fell into water she'ein lehem soif. But if the water falls into the person, it's a different halacha. And the Mabit discusses a similar case to the Titanic, where there was a ship that sunk, but people that were survivors saw how the people were in rooms, and the water came in, and al piteva, there was no way they can go out of the room, so they ended up drowning within the room itself. So the Mabit says that's not Maim She'ein Lehem Soif, they're Yesh Lehem Soif. He's in that room, he couldn't get out. And Mamela, you could consider it like the Gemara said. We saw about the Gemara Chachamim say Maim She'ein Lehem Soif, it's mutter. The Beis Yosef disagreed with the Mabit. The Beis Yosef said no, it's not considered Maim She'esh Lehem Soif. At the end of the day, he's still in the ocean, and maybe whatever the Cheshbeinos were. But this is one famous shita of the Mabit, that if someone's inside the ship when the ship sinks, we can consider it to be Maim She'esh Lehem Soif, and therefore we can give his wife a head. Another svara that he said, there's something called Goy Mesiach Lefi Tumoy. if a guy said this guy died, then even though the guy is possible for Eidus Bechlal, but since he's just saying it's Tamazoi, we trust him. Now, and even though we know that the guy is also relying on the basic information that we have, he's relying on the same information that we know that the ship sunk. And it's not like he's for sure saw this person actually die. But halachically, since the guy said so, we can accept the Eidus of the guy, especially that if it's the owner of the ship, and by him, every person that died that has relatives, they had to pay insurance, they had to deal with court cases. So B'meila, it's more of a reason to believe, and why would he want to lie? So B'meila and Lepoil Taka, the owners of the ship, they were sending out messages to all the people that contacted them, and they said yes, and well, unfortunately, your husband died. So B'meila, that's another heter over here, that he's a goy mesiach lefitume, especially the owner of the ship, and that's why they can allow her to remarry. What? He was on the ship. He was. Yeah, I think there was probably Aiden that saw him on the ship. I don't remember that detail. A third heter is that his sister, Shimon Meisner's sister, she testified that her husband had died. Now, she wasn't on the ship, but she sent that edus from England to Russia. Now here, the Rabbi Meskin has a whole arichas in his tshuva that we know that there are 5 women that are not believed to testify for each other. And one of them is Bas Chamoisa, your mother-in-law's daughter, which in this case would be Mrs. Meisner's sister-in-law. It says also to her for her to testify. She has a whole arichas pilpul of could she testify, can she testify? Balkapanim was another svara that she said, again, even though her edus was also not based on her seeing him drown, based on the general message that she sent. So that was a third svara that he brings. And a fourth svara that he brings, which sometimes people say, is that if he would be alive, he would have came, because their marriage was a good marriage. And this is halacha that's brought down often, that if it's a good marriage, then we assume that the husband probably would find a way to come back, especially in today's day and age when there's technology. Today, meaning in Tafresh Ayin Beis, already there was technology for them to communicate. There was media, and or there would be a coil. People would talk about it, that this guy came and he would find out. So based on these 4 things, like I said, he wrote a letter to the Panovich Erav, to Rabbi Yitzchak Yaakov Rabinovich, and he wrote him back. In the tshuva that I saw, it seems like he didn't really, the heter is not 100%. But I read in different articles that Shitaka remarried, and since she was a religious woman, the assumption is that she got a heter and she remarried. So that's the one aguna we know for a fact, that she went to Arav, and the Pasha she got a heter. Like I said, there's other svaras that people brought up, and reasons like the water was very cold. So Alpiteva, most people died. A lot of people didn't die from drowning, meaning that they sunk under the water. They died from the cold. They said the water was you couldn't survive in that water like more than 2 hours because it was next to an iceberg. Everything's freezing ice. So they had life jackets, but they couldn't survive because of the cold. So it's other svaras that people use. But again, in this tshuva from Rabbi Meskin, he doesn't mention that. So in my understanding, the siyata deshmaya to paskin halacha lemaisa is when you pass on lemaisa. So these are the svaras that he brings. The next shaila is regarding the shaila of Hatzalah, the shaila of who he's supposed to save. So here also I want to point out that whatever happened on the boat, but this is only a discussion if there's be a Rav that would actually be there on the boat b'shas ma'aseh, and he would be asked what to do, then we have this discussion. Like now you can't judge anybody, you know exactly what happened, but just beside the inyan, what would be the right thing to do? So here there's bets in 2 shailas. Number 1 is chayecha koidmin. You have this one spot in the lifeboat. Are you supposed to give it to somebody else? You're supposed to take it for yourself? Can you do either or? And then there's dine kedima ba'atzalah taka. Who was first? Are women and children first? What about koyanim? What talmidei chachamim? How does that work? So this also is a huge sugya. We'll just talk about it a little bit bekitzer. So the first question of Chayecha Koidmin, so there's a Gemara Bab Mitzia which discusses 2 people that are traveling, and one has a cup of water, and if they're going to both drink, each one a half a cup, they're going to die. It won't be enough to keep them alive, but if one of them drinks, then at least he's going to survive. So one opinion, the Gemara says, let them both die, because they can't go and actively drink the whole thing and let the other person die, but Rabbi Akiva said, V'chei achicha imach, Chayecha Koidmim, l'chayei chavercha. Your life comes first. If it's your cup of water, you drink first. Now, Rabbi Akiva didn't say if it's a chayva or it's a reshus. Rabbi Akiva said, for sure it's permission. For sure you're allowed to drink the water first. So in the Titanic, for sure you had permission to take the spot and you didn't have to give it away to somebody else. The question is, those that gave away their spot, did they have the reshus to do so? Because is it a chayva or not? So there's a story in Sefer Hasidim where it says that there were 2 people were sitting, Two tzaddikim were seen. We'll see who they were in a moment. And enemies came, and they want to kill them. Sorry, in a case where two people are sitting, and enemies come and want to kill them. If one's a Talmud Chacham and the other one's a Hedyot, it's a mitzvah for the Hedyot to say, "Kill me and don't kill my chaver." And he brings a story which is not found in Chazal as far as we know, but the story is that Rabbi Reuven ben Itzrubli, he was in a situation with Rabbi Akiva, and he told the goyim, "Kill me and don't kill Rabbi Akiva, because everyone needs Rabbi Akiva." So according to the Sefer Chassidim, we see that Chayecha Koidmin is Reshus, not a Chayva. If it's a Chayva, how can you give up your life? You have to keep your own life. You can obviously argue that this case is different because this is not Stam, this is Rabbi Akiva, it's a Talmud Chacham. If two people are on the same level, maybe not. Which, by the way, this whole discussion would only be for Yidden. To give up for a Goy, L'cheda, there's no heter whatsoever. But again, we're not judging because we weren't there. We're just saying Mitzad, if a Rav would be there, we ask the Shaila, this is the sugya that he would have to bring up.
What would Chayecha Koidmin mean in that case?
That if you have an opportunity to get into the lifeboat, do not give it. In this case, if they're telling you one of you has to be killed, so you should volunteer yourself. Instead of just letting the guy decide, you should get up and say, my friend's a Talmud Chacham, so let kill me instead of killing my friend. Your life comes first.
What would you say then?
Oh, the opposite. Chayecha Kodim means that you have reshus to not get up and give your life. You have reshus to let the guy choose the other person. But from Sefer Chassidim we see that there is reshus. It's not a chayv. It's only reshus. And in this case, it's even a mitzvah to give up your life. There's different poskim say different things. The Ohr HaChaim HaKadosh, he has a sefer called Rishon LeTzion, which is on Shulchan Aruch, and he writes that yes, you have reshus to give it, but it's not a chayv. There is a reshus. So according to the Ohr HaChaim, you could have a cup of water, even though la'alacha you could keep it for yourself. If you want to give it to somebody else, seemingly, even though he's not a Talmud Chacham, you're allowed to. So according to the Ohr HaChaim, it would be fine for these people to give up their lives to let other people go into the ship, which, by the way, some people which did survive, some men which survived, they ended up suffering their entire life. People made fun of them. Oh, you used to survive, and women died because of you, and children died because of you. So a lot of them, some of them got divorced. Their wives didn't want to live with them. Such a terrible husband you are. Such a terrible man you are. So it was really a hard, in a way, the people that survived, Lavdavka, had it so easy. Some of them did, seemingly. Akoponim, the Ohr HaChaim says that you have permission. It's to give up your life. You can do either way, so it wasn't wrong for them. However, from the Igros Moshe, from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, it's mashma no, that you have to take the cup for yourself, and it's also for you to give up your life. Again, he doesn't address the Sefer Chassidim about a Talmud Chacham, but if people are more or less the same level, according to the Igros Moshe, you have an obligation to save your life. It's forbidden for you to give up your life for somebody else. And Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about this, when it talks about giving tzedakah, the Alter Rebbe says, even though the Chazal tell us, Chayecha Koidmi, that only refers to, you have, there's only one cup of water left. However, when a poor man needs basics and you have extras, then we don't say that your basar comes before your friend's basics. And then the Alter Rebbe continues and says, he says, even if it's in a case where that it's not really like your extras and for his basics, you shouldn't be medaktik lahamid aladin. You should be lifnim b'shuras adin, and you should try to help give. Alter Rebbe seems to be saying that chayecha koidmin is not a chayvus or a shus, and better to give your life. He's not saying literally to give your life. He's talking about giving tzedakah. But if you look from the Alter Rebbe's kav over here, it's more mashma that it's not a chayva to keep your own life, and if you want to sacrifice your life, it would be permitted. So again, machlokes haposkim, different poskim say different things, and there's many other sources in Chazal, but this is the basics. The second question we asked, who comes first, man or woman? So here we have a Gemara in Horiyos, which the Gemara says, Ha'ish koidem li'isha lahachyos u'lahoshiv aveda. Comes to returning a lost item from a man or a woman, the man comes first. And lahachiyos, what does lahachiyos mean? We're going to talk about soon. But then the Mishnah continues, when it comes to ksus, or leitzim beis hashevi, when they're gathering, they're collecting for clothing, or to save them from jail, then the woman comes before the man. So the Kapanim, the Gemara in Haidiyah says the man comes before the Isha when it comes to lahachiyos, which on first glance would mean that if you have to save their lives, the man comes first. But then we have a Gemara in Ksubas, which has Tanu Rabbanon, Yosem v'Yesema Shaboli Sparnes, when they come to get Parnasa, when they get their livelihood, Mefarnesin es HaYisema, V'charka Mefarnesin es HaYosem. First goes the girl, then goes the boy. And the reason is because the man, it's normal for men to go around knocking on doors collecting for money. For women, it's a lot less common. So therefore, you should give the woman what she needs and not the man. So at first glance, there's a stira between the two Gemaras. When you have a man and a woman, from the Gemara in Hoydius, it seems the man goes first, and the Gemara in Ksuba seems that the woman comes first. So how do you answer this stira, and what do you pass on halacha l'maisa? So this rabbi's name is Rabbi Eliezer of Altenburg, known as the Tzitz Eliezer. He was a rabbi in a hospital, meaning of a hospital, one of the biggest rabbanim in the past generation. He didn't pass away so long ago. And many shilas of life and death were asked him about operations and other things. And Nabach, today we have in Israel, unfortunately, all these terrorist attacks. So a lot of times when the paramedics come and they have to treat, so the shilah comes, who did they treat first? So he has a whole tshuva on this subject, not about the Titanic, but the subject Bechlal. And he says that according to the Rambam, the two Gemaras are arguing, and the Rambam passes like the Gemara in Ksubis, which is that the woman comes first, like it says, Haisha kedemis leish lahachil olachases leitzim beis hashavi teishish darkan lachzer. Now, the way that the Tzitz Eliezer seems to be applying it is that according to the Rambam, also when it comes to saving from life and death, women come first, and according to this understanding, that l'chayr would be the right thing in the Titanic. Taka, women come first. That was the right thing to do according to halacha. That you have to save the woman first, meaning the sailors or those people that were trying to save them would have had to save the woman first. However, it's lav dafka because it could be the Rambam is only talking about giving tzedakah. Meaning that they're not talking about saving from death. Saving life and death is a different shaila, which we're not talking about. We're talking about giving tzedakah. But al-kabonim, this is one way of learning pshat. What? Alter Rebbe before Chayach HaKoidmin. Right, also.
And he said the reason. For sure, if there is no the reason, there's not.
True. But the second, that's the Me'idi. The second opinion is the Me'idi. The Me'idi says the answer to the contradiction in the two sugyas is that it says really the woman goes first. And why? Because the man is able to go knock on doors. The Gemara in Hoydiya says the man goes first. That's a case where the man can't go and collect for whatever reason. When the man cannot go collect, then they have to save the man first. So based on this, the discussion over here, they want to say that by the Titanic, in theory, they didn't know exactly what's going to happen. So they're actually going to sink or not. Some people didn't want to go into the lifeboats because they felt that the Titanic, even though it was sinking, seemed to be stronger. So they didn't know for sure. So maybe in that case where in L'chayra men are naturally stronger, they were able to save themselves. They could have swam. They could have figured out. Some Taka people fell into the water, we'll soon see, and they survived, like climbing onto the boats afterwards or onto other icebergs. So L'chayra, the Me'idi says it's not a contradiction, but really it all depends on it depends if you're able to, and if you're not able to, then if they neither. But l'chayr, according to the Me'idi, comes out that if neither can save themselves, then the man comes first. But again, the Me'idi seems to be talking about tzedakah and not about life and death. But then we have the third opinion, which is the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Beis Yosef and the Ramah and the Shach and the Taz, and the Ramah writes clearly. Im shneim reitzim litboya banor, which Pashas means if both of them are about to drown, hatzolas ha'ish koiden. The man comes first. Now the Beis Yosef in his Pirush on the Torah writes this, but in the Shulchan Aruch he does not write it again. He leaves it blank. But the Ramah adds it, and quoting the Beis Yosef, and also the Shach and the Taz and other later Paskin as well. So l'chayra, if you just go by how we work with Dedekla, which was you open up a Shulchan Aruch and Paskin L'maisa, seemingly it was a wrong thing. This whole concept of women and children being saved first is l'chayra wrong because men go first. But like I said, there's other Rishonim that you can learn differently, and you can argue. And even in the Ramah, some people learn this from Pshat, but this seems to be the way people try to address the situation that. Really, the man comes first. There's many, like I said, there's so much to talk about. We're way over time. Still want to get to the next section of the stories. There's also Sikha the Rebbe about Yaakov and Esav, and Noshim, Banim and Noshim, whatever. It's Blisay. We're going to finish off now the last subject about stories of survivors. So first of all, we'll start off with the famous story which people say is not true. And that is that a chassid came to the Rebbe Rashab, the Ayin Beis. This is right before the Hemshech Ayin Beis, which started on Shavuos. And the chassid came to the Rebbe Rashab and he asked him if someone wants to sail on the Titanic. And the Rebbe Rashab said no, and he said he wants to go anyway. So I said to take a Tanya with you at least. Lopoili did not take a Tanya, and he ended up dying. And so when officially the Rebbe Rashab then responded, he started by not listening with the Tanya, and then he ended up v'chulu v'chulu. But most chaykim say the story is not true, and the pashtus, there's only one source for the story with this about the Titanic and about the Tanya. There's other stories also with the Frierdiker Rebbe of Chassidim asking for advice, and they were told not to, and they ended up drowning. But l'chayra, the story is not true, but you should just know that such a story is said. Another story is with the tzaddik that we saw Chortikov, the Chortikov dynasty or descendants of the Ruzhiner, descendants of the Mezritcher Maggid. So here there's a story that there was a person, I think the person's daughter said over the story that her father went to the Chortikov Rebbe and he asked her, Rishus, he wants to immigrate to America. So the Rebbe told him, Los grüßen dem Amerikaner Gott, send regards to the American God. So he was like a bit turned off. What does that mean, American God? Like we have one Eibishter. So the Charter Rebbe said, you're going for Parnasa, but the Eibishter over here can't give you Parnasa, Dafka over there. So the Chassid understood that the Rebbe is unhappy with his decision, and he decided not to set sail, and Taka, because of that, he was saved. So that's a story which is documented, which is not in the Sefer. We have it Ish Mepish, we know exactly who says the story. That's a reliable story, so to speak. What? It left from England, but most people immigrated through. They go from Russia, they would go to England or France. It was both places, France and England. They had two stops, so they were able to get there. Huh? No, it was going to New York. Going to New York and so forth. Another story is with the Rebbe from Stalin. He was called the Yenuka. He became a Rebbe at a very young age. So his name was Rabbi Yisrael Perlov. And also this story was set around, but like I said, Rabbi Goldover, he does amazing research, and he tracked down people that heard it from these people themselves, that there were two brothers that they came to the Stalin Rebbe. They asked him they want to travel to New York, to America on the Titanic, and he said, name. No, and as Chassidim, you listen to what the Rebbe says, and because of that listening, they ended up saving their lives were saved. Another story Rabbi Goldover found, and this is a newspaper from that year, it's a 130-year-old newspaper, that someone had an interview with one of the people that was selling the tickets to go on the ship. So this guy that was selling the tickets was religious, and a friend of his or acquaintance of his that was Jewish bought a ticket, but he only paid a deposit, didn't pay in full. And since the ship was leaving on Isru Chag, so the day before, which was Achron Shel Pesach, this non-religious Jew who had paid partially for the ticket came to this religious Jew who was selling the tickets to his home, and he said, I want to finish paying you so I can get the full ticket. So he said, on Pesach, I don't do business, it's Yom Tov today, I'm sorry I can't help you. So the other Jew who was not religious of Haraya came to pay, but he respected that seemingly, or whether he likes it or not. So Lapayil, he wasn't able to buy the ticket, so he said, fine, I'll just use it for the next ticket on the next ship. And as a result of that, he was saved also. So in this case, before we said the story, Yaakov Birnbaum, because of Pesach. Al Piteva, because he stayed for Pesach, he ended up dying. But in this case, the opposite, because the seller kept Pesach at Yom Tov, the other Yid ended up being saved. So these are just stories that we said, 3-4 stories, people that were not on the ship that were saved because they weren't on the ship. But then there's a story which is also not brought down anywhere. This story, and even in the Titanic, all the books, they don't have the story anywhere else besides in this book. This guy's name is Rabbi Pinchas Korenfeld. He's one of the leaders of the community, the Rosh HaKol today in Belgium, in Antwerp. And he told Rabbi Goldhaber the story. He heard the story from his father, and his father heard the story from two people that were on the boat. And they were from Yidden that were from Belgium on the boat. And when they realized what's going on, that they're not letting the men on the boat, on the lifeboats, where they probably also were not first class, and they were less of a hope of getting on. So they took a table and they threw it overboard, and they used it as a raft, and they jumped onto it, and they were not in the water, so they weren't freezing, and then eventually they ended up pulling themselves up on a lifeboat. So who they were, the details, I don't know. And another thing that he says also, Rabbi Kornfeld has also said that they told him what music they were singing, what the band was playing as the ship was sinking. This is a famous detail, that as the ship was sinking, the band continued playing music till the end. So there's a big machloikis amongst the survivors, which song they were actually singing. Some say this, some say that. So he says it was a niggin that today they sing in Chassidische Kreisen. So I reached out to Rabbi Goldaver, can you tell me the niggin? So he said he can't sing, he doesn't remember it. So I just today, this morning, I got the email from Rabbi Kornfeld, and I sent him an email. Can I call him? Can I hear the niggin? He didn't respond to me yet. Hopefully he'll respond to me, and I'll be able to sing you the song of the drowning of the Titanic. So this is a story which doesn't say anywhere else. Another story is the story of Leah Ax, or her real name was Axman, and her son Ephraim Fisher or Philip. This is a famous story that as her and her son were on the boat, and her husband was already in America, and she was coming to come. He sent money to come bring her, and she was on the boat with her baby, her 10-month-old baby. And as she was going there, so there was a man that was trying to get onto the lifeboats, and the sailor said, "No, man, only women and children." So this guy got very frustrated. So he said, "Women and children only. I'll tell you that." And he grabbed the baby out of Leah's hands, and he threw the baby overboard. And Ashkacha Pradesh, the baby landed in a lifeboat. And so Leah didn't know that. She thought that her baby just drowned right now. So you can imagine the Hartz V'Namame, she fainted, they pushed her into a boat, and she ended up surviving. Now what happened later on in the night, What happened was that a ship that was nearby, not the closest ship, which is another story, the ship that was nearby ended up bringing them onto that ship, and then they went to New York. And on that ship, she saw a lady and with a baby, and she saw the baby. She recognized him. That's my baby. And then they said, no, it's my baby. But the other lady said, it's not my baby. The other lady agreed it wasn't hers, but she said that it's that Hashem gave him to me because I lost my husband. They got into a whole fight over there, and they went to the captain of that ship. It was a different captain, not Smith, a captain of that ship. And he's like Shlomo Melech now. No, so he was back and forth. He didn't know what to do. So the Leah said, he's my son. He has a bris milah. And there was officially also another birthmark, but the way most people say the story is the bris milah. And he checked, obviously it was a bris milah, and therefore he ended up going back to his mother. So that's another fascinating story. So he was one of the youngest survivors, and he passed away recently. His name was Frank or Philip. I don't know exactly which, but his Hebrew name was Ephraim Fishel Axman. Another fascinating story is from a guy also. It doesn't say this anywhere else. Rabbi Goldover found the story. This is a picture of a big Rav in Eretz Yisrael. His name was Rabbi Hersh Pesach Frank. Tzvi Pesach Frank. He had a daughter-in-law. The daughter-in-law's maiden name was either Yaffe or Friedman. A bit unclear to me. But the daughter-in-law had her brother. His name was Moshe Yaffe. And Moshe Yaffe left Russia and he went to England. He wanted to start he left Eretz Yisrael. And he went to England to try to make money. His parents were unhappy with that because they knew that if he's away from home in a more developed country, so to speak, assimilated, there's going to be more chash of chas v'shalom, something happening to him. So therefore, so his father didn't really let him go. The Pele left anyway. It was a shtickle about tefillah, but he started becoming more modern. And then he told his father, okay, English's not working out, I want to go to America. His father said, Atkan, that I don't let B'Shomei finished. Lepoli didn't listen, and he went on the boat, and it seemed like he was planning on becoming more assimilated. Lepoli it said here there's a steer in the book. Once it says he was cruel, we're almost over. And one he was like one of the workers. Or it says that he bought a third class ticket. So there's a contradiction also. The answer is Lepoli, as the ship was sinking, he made a neder, a promise. If Hashem saves me, I'm going to become from again. And Taki was saved, and he came to New York. And the sister says he became religious, and every day would go to shul and Beis Medrash. So some of you might know there's a story of the Titanic from Avram Chayon. So I wondered, but I didn't read this. Officially, there are 16 volumes. So I figured that probably this is Rabbi Chayon. He based his books off the story. So I emailed him. He said it never happened, no connection. Never heard the story. And Ma Kesher, this Moshe Yafet, and my Moshe Valis, whatever. He says no connection. Well, he never heard the story before. It's just Hashgacha, but it's the same name. I didn't really read his books. I just thought, based on what little that I read, maybe half of one of them, I thought it's that story. Well, that's another fascinating story about the Titanic.